In a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, where nothing ever happened, a simple flagpole sparked a storm. The HOA thought they could intimidate one homeowner, but they misjudged everything. The trouble began on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of morning where sunlight made the freshly mowed lawns look like they belonged in a commercial, and birds chirped as if they were auditioning. The neighborhood was quiet, calm, and blissfully unaware that a months-long battle was about to ignite, one that would drag every resident, every HOA board member, and eventually the local news into its orbit. At the center of it all stood a modest flagpole planted beside the driveway of one very determined homeowner. It wasn't even an elaborate installation, just a small, well-kept pole with a neatly folded American flag rising above it, swaying gently in the breeze. It had been there for weeks without issue, drawing compliments from neighbors who appreciated the subtle touch of patriotism among the manicured hedges and identical mailboxes. No one complained. Not one person suggested it was out of place. So when the homeowner opened the mail and found a crisp white envelope from the HOA with "Urgent, Compliance Required" written in aggressive red ink, the shock was immediate. Inside was a violation notice written in stiff, formal language. The HOA declared that the flagpole constituted an unauthorized permanent structure, violating subsection D of the Community Architectural Guidelines. The board demanded removal of the pole within 7 days and issued a fine for non-compliance. The tone of the letter carried an air of condescension, as though the mere existence of a flagpole was an act of rebellion the HOA simply could not tolerate. The homeowners stared at the paper, baffled. The guidelines mentioned sheds, gazebos, additions, structural changes to houses, but nowhere had there been a direct mention of flagpoles. Besides, federal law explicitly protected the right to display the American flag. That protection wasn't vague or debatable. It had been established precisely because of overreaching HOAs like this one. Still, the HOA's letter implied absolute authority, as if the board believed residents wouldn't dare challenge them. For years, this HOA had operated like a miniature monarchy, issuing fines for lawn heights, mailbox paint tones, even the shade of mulch permitted in front yards. Many homeowners complied out of exhaustion rather than agreement, paying small fines and resigning themselves to the control. But this was different. The flag wasn't decorative, it was symbolic. It represented something far larger than any HOA rulebook, and the homeowner knew instantly that removing it was not an option. The next morning, as the sun spilled over the rooftops, the homeowner walked outside and examined the flagpole, noting how harmless it was. It didn't obstruct anything, didn't pose a safety risk, and didn't violate any meaningful standards. Birds perched on top occasionally, and neighbors admired it. The entire conflict felt surreal, like being ticketed for breathing too enthusiastically. Word began spreading as neighbors saw the letter. Some shook their heads knowingly, that HOA again, overreaching and nitpicking. Others encouraged standing up to them, recalling times when the board pushed too far and needed someone to remind them they weren't dictators. With every conversation, the homeowner's resolve strengthened. A formal response was drafted, calm, factual, and firm. It cited the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, a federal law explicitly prohibiting HOAs from restricting homeowners from displaying the U.S. flag on their property, with only minimal limitations for safety and structural integrity. The homeowner noted that the flagpole posed no risk, adhered to all city ordinances, and caused no disturbance. The letter requested immediate dismissal of the fine and withdrawal of the violation notice. It was sent both by certified mail and email, ensuring the HOA couldn't claim ignorance. Days passed. No reply. Instead, a second violation notice arrived, doubling the fine and warning of escalating enforcement measures, including daily penalties and a possible lien against the property if the unauthorized structure remained. The escalation was no longer annoyance. It was intimidation. The kind of tactics HOAs relied on, betting residents would fold under pressure. But this time the board had chosen the wrong target. Neighbors rallied behind the homeowner, offering copies of old meeting minutes and even screenshots of other homes with unapproved lawn ornaments, far more intrusive than a small flagpole. Some suggested attending the next board meeting en masse to demand accountability. By now, the HOA's arrogance had transformed what could have been a simple conversation into a battle of principles. The homeowner gathered every piece of documentation, printed copies of federal statutes, and prepared for whatever came next. This wasn't just about a flag anymore. It was about power, overreach, and the board's belief that they could do whatever they pleased without consequences. The night before the next HOA meeting, the homeowners stood in the driveway, watching the flag ripple under the streetlight. It wasn't loud or flashy, just a quiet symbol of rights long established and hard won. And as it waved gently, it became a reminder that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how petty the opposition seemed. The HOA had started a battle it wasn't prepared to finish, and the homeowner was ready. The night of the HOA meeting arrived with an unusual tension in the air. Residents trickled into the community clubhouse, some out of curiosity, others out of frustration with years of petty enforcement. For once, the small room, usually uncomfortably empty, was filled to the edges with folding chairs, murmurs, and simmering annoyance that had finally reached a breaking point. The board members sat at the front table, stiff and rigid like statues guarding their authority. They had no idea how drastically the balance of power was about to shift. The homeowner entered quietly, carrying a binder overflowing with printed laws, correspondences, and evidence meticulously organized. But even without the binder, the support was palpable. Neighbors nodded, some even patting the homeowner on the shoulder, relieved someone was finally pushing back against what many privately referred to as the mini dictatorship. As the meeting began, the board followed its usual routine, approving minutes, rattling off financial updates, and meandering through trivial agenda items. But the atmosphere had changed. Instead of the usual silence and apathy, residents listened intently, waiting for the moment they all knew was coming. Even the board members seemed uneasy, glancing at the unusually large turnout with thinly disguised discomfort. When the agenda finally reached new violations, the board president cleared her throat with an air of forced authority. She announced the non-compliant residential flagpole structure, carefully avoiding directly naming the homeowner, though everyone knew exactly who it concerned. She emphasized that the structure violated community guidelines, that notices had been sent, and that fines were accumulating. The homeowner rose slowly, carrying the binder to the front. The room quieted. Even the board president's expression flickered for a moment of apprehension. For too long, she had expected compliance through silence. Tonight was different. The homeowner placed the binder on the table and began presenting the facts. Through calm, measured narration, the homeowner explained the legal protections under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, outlining how federal law preempted HOA regulations that sought to ban or restrict the display of the U.S. flag. Each point was backed by printed legislation, case examples, and statements from legal resources. The board murmured among themselves, clearly caught off guard. They tried to assert that community policies overrode federal law, a claim so absurd that several residents audibly scoffed. The homeowner then presented photos of other homes in the neighborhood displaying unapproved items. Yard statues, decorative windmills, lighting fixtures, none of which had ever been fined or cited. The selective enforcement was no longer deniable. The binder made the pattern obvious. This wasn't about aesthetics or rules. It was about control. Residents began speaking up, raising concerns about the board's arbitrary decisions over the years. Some recounted incidents where their complaints were ignored. Others described receiving warnings that contradicted what was actually in the rulebook. The room's energy had shifted entirely. The board was no longer presiding over submissive homeowners, but facing a community that had finally run out of patience. The board president attempted to maintain composure, insisting that the flagpole might pose a safety hazard, but the homeowner had come prepared. A printed statement from a licensed contractor confirmed the installation was structurally sound and fully compliant with local codes. Another document revealed that the HOA's own rules offered no prohibition against small residential flagpoles in front yards. By this point, it was clear to everyone that the board had acted without grounds. They had issued fines based on an interpretation of rules that didn't exist. They had ignored federal law entirely. And worst of all, they had escalated penalties without so much as acknowledging the homeowner's lawful, certified response. The tension rose as residents demanded answers. Why had the board doubled fines without investigating the facts? Why had they disregarded a federal law? Why did they punish some homeowners while ignoring others? The board president's attempt to maintain composure faltered visibly. She insisted that they would review the matter privately, hoping to quell the unrest, but the homeowner pointed out that transparency was required regarding disciplinary procedures, especially when fines were involved. The room echoed with agreement. Cornered, the board attempted a recess, scrambling for a way out. They huddled in a side room for an uncomfortably long time as murmurs filled the clubhouse. Speculation grew. Some thought the board was deciding how to save face. Others whispered that this might be the moment the community finally rebelled against years of micromanagement. When the board finally returned, their posture had noticeably deflated. Their expressions carried the unmistakable look of people who realized they had overplayed their hand. They announced that they would temporarily suspend the fines and further investigate the legal references provided. No one in the room believed this was anything but damage control. The homeowner knew the fight was far from over. The HOA wasn't ready to admit fault. Not yet. But they had been forced into retreat. A small victory, but an important one. Leaving the meeting, the homeowner felt both relief and anticipation. The battle had shifted decisively, but it wasn't resolved. Not until the HOA formally withdrew the violation, erased the fines, and acknowledged their unlawful overreach. And that moment was coming. The board just didn't know how quickly things were about to spiral beyond their control.
In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood buzzed with a kind of restless anticipation. For the first time in years, residents felt a spark of empowerment, proof that the HOA could be challenged rather than obeyed out of fear. The board, however, reacted with an escalating mix of panic and indignation. Their usual air of superiority had been punctured, and instead of accepting the setback, they attempted to reassert control through a flurry of emails dripping with formality and vague warnings. All of them were directed at the homeowner. The board claimed they needed additional time to review the legal materials provided. They claimed the flagpole matter was complex and required specialized interpretation. But everyone knew what was really happening. They were scrambling, desperately searching for justification that simply didn't exist. The violation had no legal foundation, and the board was digging in its heels purely out of pride. The homeowner didn't waver. Copies of every correspondence were forwarded to a local attorney with experience handling HOA disputes, an attorney who confirmed what the homeowner already knew. The board was in clear violation of federal law. The attorney drafted a firm, concise letter outlining the legal consequences if the HOA continued issuing fines or threats. The letter was addressed politely, but with unmistakable authority, citing chapter and verse of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. It specified the protections guaranteed to homeowners and detailed how the HOA's ongoing actions breached those rights. The homeowner sent the attorney's letter by certified mail and email. Its arrival landed like a thunderclap. Within 24 hours, panic struck the board. Members called an emergency session. Whispers spread among residents. Some said board members had been calling each other all morning. Others said the president looked as though the entire structure of the HOA was crumbling around her. For once, their power no longer felt absolute. Then something unexpected happened. The homeowner received a message from a local news reporter who'd heard rumors of an HOA attempting to ban the American flag. A few neighbors had apparently shared the story, and now a camera crew was interested in doing a segment about it. The homeowner hesitated briefly, knowing it might escalate things further. But after everything the HOA had done, after the fines, the threats, the intimidation, there was no reason to protect their reputation. And so the homeowner agreed. The news segment aired 2 days later. It wasn't dramatic or confrontational. It simply presented the facts. The camera showed the small flagpole waving peacefully in the sunlight. The reporter explained the protections guaranteed by federal law and contrasted them with the actions taken by the HOA. Neighbors appeared on screen, expressing frustration over the board's behavior. Their testimonies revealed years of micromanagement and a long pattern of arbitrary enforcement. The homeowner's calm, factual explanation of the dispute became the centerpiece of the story. The reaction was immediate. The HOA board was flooded with emails, not just from residents, but from viewers in the area. Some expressed disbelief that the board would attempt such a thing. Others demanded accountability. Even neighboring communities took notice, using the segment as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The board president, long accustomed to making decisions without scrutiny, now found herself at the center of a public controversy she had never anticipated. And then came the final blow. The attorney forwarded the homeowner a written confirmation from a federal housing compliance office stating, as plainly as possible, that the HOA had no authority whatsoever to prohibit the display of the U.S. flag on a lawful residential flagpole. The document outlined penalties HOAs could face for violating the act and invited the homeowner to file a formal complaint if the issue persisted. The homeowner didn't have to send it to the board. The news reporter sent it instead, asking the board president if she had a comment for a follow-up segment. That was the moment everything collapsed. The HOA board called a sudden community-wide meeting for the following evening. Flyers appeared taped to mailboxes, inboxes filled with formal-sounding invitations, and the neighborhood once again funneled into the clubhouse. But this time, the board members looked nothing like the confident enforcers they once were. Their posture was stiff, their expressions strained, and the room buzzed with an energy of impatient anticipation. The board president stood and read a prepared statement. Her voice wavered despite her attempt to maintain composure. The HOA, she said, had reviewed all relevant legal materials. They had carefully considered the concerns of the community, and they now recognized that the flagpole in question was, in fact, fully compliant with federal law. The violation was rescinded. All fines had been formally dismissed, and in a remarkable turn, the board extended a public apology to the homeowner for any misunderstanding and distress caused by their enforcement actions. The word apology nearly echoed in the room. Residents exchanged stunned glances. Some nodded in approval, others smirked, knowing the apology had been dragged out of the board with the force of absolute necessity. But regardless of the board's sincerity, the victory was unmistakable. The homeowners simply thanked the room and returned to their seat. There was no gloating, no triumphant speech. The flagpole, standing quietly outside under the fading daylight, had spoken loudly enough. And the weeks that followed, something shifted throughout the neighborhood. Residents began attending meetings regularly. They questioned decisions, requested clarity, and pushed for transparency in enforcement policies. The board became noticeably more cautious, aware that their power was not infinite, and that homeowners were willing to stand their ground when necessary. As for the homeowner, The flag continued to wave every morning and every night, untouched and unchallenged. It was more than a symbol now. It was a reminder of what could happen when ordinary people refused to be pushed around by those who mistook authority for dominance. The HOA had tried to ban the American flag, and they regretted it, publicly, completely, and permanently.